Welcome everyone. Welcome to this new webinar of IPFA, of Agora, I wanted to say. Thanks everyone for being here. It's our biggest webinar. We are really surprised of having so many amazing people, almost 100, and we for sure know that more people is coming. We had 1,000 people register. This is really, really great. Also for having these really good artists. On this time, we normally invite people that we don't know because we want to know new perspective, different things. But this time, just to welcome 2026, we decided to invite huge friends from our community. All of them are professors in our school, or they have conferences or workshops or something done with us in the past. And that means that they are huge friends of our community and also from Experimental Photo Festival. I'm just going to say thanks to my team, Pedro, that is there. Hi, Pedro. Thank you for helping with the technical part. If you have any questions, you can just put it on the chat, okay? And Pedro is going to be there taking the notes and everything. And when we have time in the end, we will come back on your questions, okay? Just feel free to comment, to share your Instagram's account if you want other people to see you or whatever. Just feel free to use the chat, and Pedro will be controlling and putting all the questions. I will try to ask them to the artists when I consider the best. Just send it to there. And also Laura, thank you so much, Laura, for being here.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Hi,
Also
I'm
working
here.
with the
I don't know where
with
in
the
the square.
emails, with the likes, with everything. Thank you so much for being there. And as we have this amazing team, I can just focus on thinking and talking with the artists. Today we have the big pleasure of having John Beaver from the US. Hi, John. How are you? You're mute.
I'm good too.
You're good? Having fun?
I am.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Good news. And we also have Paweł, Kula, artist of 2020, 2023 of Experimental Photo Festival. How are you?
Hi, I am fine.
Everything's good?
Yeah, it's dark here and snowy.
Paweł has many projects, some of them with solarography. We don't know what he's going to present today, but that's good of him. He's full of surprises. And also Lynn, how are you, Lynn, going back to the US? How are you?
Hi, doing well. How are you all?
Are you ready for coming back to Experimental Photo Festival in 2027?
Yes, hopefully. That is the goal, is to make it back in 2027. I know it's been a few years since I was there last, but every
Yes.
time I've participated with Experimental Photo Festival, you get to chat with people who are doing such unique things, and it's always a great time. So,
I think it was on 2022. Is that possible?
yep, 2021 and 2022.
It was kind of the middle of COVID. For sure, if you come now, you are going to enjoy it much more.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Thank you, all of you, for being here. We're 123 participants. That is great. Sorry, Chris. Stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
someone has, yeah.
Yes, I think it was Chris. I just stopped it. Good. No need to talk. You can just put all the comments on the chat, please. John, are you ready? We want to know what you have been doing. I think you were here in 2024. You have been doing research for 2 years or more. We want to know what you have to tell us.
I'm ready. I was there in 2022 and 2023.
Okay, that means 3 years of research, 2 years and a half of research.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about a process that I came up with in late 2021 and actually first presented anywhere at Experimental Photo Festival in 2022 and then again in 2023. And I'm going to say a little bit about how it works, but really what I want to talk about is how you might find this as a set of artistic tools for especially incorporating the process itself and even the materials you're working with into the content of the art. And so I'm going to have some examples of that. First off, I'm just going to try to show some pictures. Let me see if I can get this so I can see myself better. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm pretty small, but I'll try to make this work. So I'm going to try to show some of these pictures on the camera. They have a lot of physicality to them, and then I'm going to go to a presentation and share the screen. So here are a couple of examples. So this is a picture I did on ceramic tile from a digital transparency. This is on board, and it's really a cliche beret. It's from some stationery from my late father-in-law back in the 50s, his drawings of imaginary stereo equipment. And then this is a direct print on board from a film negative. And here is a print on a piece of wood for what would have been a coasters for my 60th birthday party, but we didn't have it. So whatever. And then here's an example of something a bit more substantial. This is a picture of my wife and I, and this is on board as well. And I'll talk a little bit about this irregular edge, which is something that comes up in this process. And I put gold leaf, and you see I'm using a wide variety of colors here as well. And these have a lot of, you wouldn't put these under glass. They're not works on paper. It works on a stiff, flat surface, and it lends itself to more objects. And here is an example of one on the back of a glass stage light condenser lens. There's a reason it's on this particular background, which I won't get into. So it's printed on the back of the glass and then back painted with white. We'll talk about how all this works. In all these cases, what is actually making the image is powdered pigments. And so I use Contés a lot and hand ground in a mortar and pestle. And so with that little live intro, let me now share my screen. Okay, so I call this process new resinotype, and I came up with it in late 2021, and it was in the context of working on a book, which I'll mention in a bit. And I was looking for a lo-fi kind of alternative to gum bichromate that was not, didn't have dichromates in it or anything dangerous. And I wanted something that didn't require expensive equipment or elaborate workspace or an extensive technical background to get at least basic results. It uses dry powdered pigments and UV sensitive photopolymer resin. You can get basic results very easily, but you can also take it to a high level. It's described in quite a bit of detail in chapter 10 of my book from about a year and a half ago, Lo-Fi Photography. I hope you get a copy, and then I'll get my $5 in royalties. But if you can't get a copy, DM me and I'll send you a download link for my submitted manuscript version of that chapter, which goes step by step on how to do this process. And so the basic idea is you have a thin layer of ultraviolet curing acrylic polymer resin. You can get these resins very easily in small bottles online with a plethora of brands. Some work better than others. They're used in nail salons, used for making casting small trinkets and stuff like that. This uses just a thin layer, a millimeter or two thick. It's exposed to a particular kind of light, 365 nanometer LED, under photograms of objects or a transparency, and then the plastic is peeled off and dry powdered pigment is dusted on. And if you do light pigment on a dark background, it's a negative working process. But if you do dark pigment on a light background, it's a positive working process. And exposure times are half a minute to 10 minutes or so, depending. And this process can be done, if you choose your room lights carefully, it can be done with full illumination, absolutely as bright as you want the light to be in your workspace, does not require a dark room or a sink or water in any part of the process. So here's a brief illustration of how it works. On my website, you can find a talk I gave a couple of years ago where I actually do it at my desk right here live during the talk. Don't have time to do that now, but it can be done in a very small space, including I did an example on this desktop. But here's just some pictures of it. Whoops, going the wrong way, sorry here. So you would have some kind of stiff, flat material. Here I'm doing a test print on mat board, which isn't very good. It should be something flatter, but for tests, I often use that. And I've coated it with gesso, white gesso, so I'm always using the same background material. And I put you'll see that it's sitting on top of a sheet of thin plastic. This could be any kind of plastic. Then the board is there, and I've laid out a bead of the UV resin right out of the bottle. And then I've immediately put a sheet of a special kind of plastic called FEP that's designed to release easily from cured resins. And then I roll it out carefully underneath that layer of plastic, rolling out all air bubbles and getting an even layer. And then put on your transparency or objects if you're making photograms and expose with a 365 nanometer UV LED lamp. And as you'll see, I don't use a light box. You could, some people do, but I use a light on a stand, and I have reasons for that. You can see a reflection. These lights give off a little bit of visible light, but that's because of fluorescence. The light they give off is totally invisible. It's UVA. It won't give you a sunburn or a suntan, let alone skin cancer. The only concern is with your eyes, but that's easy to protect yourself actually with pretty ordinary glasses protect you from this light. And so it's exposed, and then the plastic is peeled off, and the resin at this point should be solid, no more liquid, but it's a little bit soft in places. And so you then simply sprinkle your powdered pigment over it. And then as soon as you brush it around with a soft brush, the image appears. And it's capable of, under the right conditions, of a nice range of tonality. And then after it's been wiped, and I often go over with my fingertips and rub it in and gently brush away any big chunks that might scratch it. And you have some hand working possibilities that can alter the final look of the print at this point. And then it's put back under the lights to fully cure. And after it fully cures, you then give it a final wipe with a soft tissue or a microfiber cloth to reach its full contrast level. These prints at the end, depending on the pigment you've used, they can be very robust. So I did one on tile that I put outside in the rain and the weather for a month, and it was hardly affected. You can rub it roughly with your hands, and they're pretty strong. It's a pretty strong print surface. Different, even on the same background with the same transparency, different pigments will give different results. So these are two prints done with the same film negative in exactly the same way with the same exposure, just using two different white pigments. And you see you get a different range of contrast depending on the pigment that's used. It's possible to, I did this just as a demonstration to show that it could be done. So I painted this piece of board with half of it with white and half of it with black. And then I did a print with a film negative and photogram objects, did one exposure with all of those things arranged onto the board, and then I covered over the black with a sheet of paper and dusted the white part with dark blue pigment, and then covered over that and dusted the black part with light yellow pigment. And you can see where the film negative is on the white with the dark pigment, it's a negative, but where it's on top of the black with the light pigment, it's a positive, and the opposite is true for the photogram objects. You can use things that aren't necessarily considered pigments. So this was a picture I made with cinnamon, ground cinnamon. It smells as good as it looks. And that's something that actually I find very intriguing, because in certain cases, you might find it useful to use some kind of pigment that has some particular meaning for the piece of art that you're making. And not only works as a picture, but also has another meaning. It's particularly, I think, amazing for photograms. There's not a lot of good, positive working photogram processes. So there's anthotype, but if you've done anthotype, you know it's difficult, not only the long exposure, really long exposure, but it's difficult to make an anthotype that has a lot of good detail with also a good controllable range of contrast. This works very well for making positive photograms that can look very realistic. This is again on the back of a piece of stage condenser. So one side of this was perfectly flat, and that's what I did the print on with dark pigment. And this is a bunch of circle templates all stacked on top of each other, and some positive transparencies that I had. And this is all part of another project, and this all has meaning for that project that I don't need to go into about this. Here's an example of, this was actually just a test print, and it's possible to expose this with sunlight instead of UV lamps. And in fact, the workshops I did at Experimental Photo Festival, we use sunlight instead. Of course, in Wisconsin here, sunlight is not as reliable, and using artificial lights is much more, you can control the exposure much better, and it's much more repeatable. But this is just a direct photogram with feathers, and the amount of detail you can get in the contrast range with the right chosen pigment can actually be very close to the original, which is something that really intrigues me regarding photograms. Well, here's an example of using this in a way where it has a deeper meaning. And this is kind of a silly example. So I have a friend, Shannon, who lives a couple blocks down the street, and in the opposite direction, down the same street, is her cafe, Moonwater Cafe. It's the only cafe with quick walking distance here, so I've been a fixture there since it opened. And so I'm good friends with Shannon. And when I go in there, I always ask her about her chickens, because she recently got some chickens and that she's been having a lot of fun with. And the chickens have been laying eggs, and she's been selling them at her cafe, and I've been buying them and eating them. And so last Christmas, I wanted to give her a little Christmas present. So I made this little refrigerator magnet out of another little tree cookie piece of wood that I stained black, and then just got her logo, her cafe's logo, off the internet, and made a transparency, a digital transparency, and did this print for her. But what I made the print with are ground up eggshell from the eggs of one of her chickens. And so it's a picture made with literally with the eggs of her own chickens that she's been having so much fun raising. And this is a picture of this next to a window, just straight down, just a straightforward photograph of this piece. But I'm going to show you pictures at an angle, and this is one of the aspects of this process that has a lot of physicality to it. And so at different angles, you get a very different effect, because as it turns out, in places where there is very little pigment, you get a very glossy surface, but where there is a lot of pigment, you get a very matte surface. And this is not a continuous tone image, but if it were, it would sort of gradually go from glossy to matte. And you even sometimes get a slight embossing effect. physical embossing effect at the edges of high contrast. And because of this matte to glossy effect, at different angles, it can even give kind of a solarized effect. So it's kind of hard to capture what these pictures are like in a photographic reproduction of the photos. You kind of got to see them in person. It's one of the features I really like about it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some more substantial. These were mostly tests that I showed you over the years, but I'm going to talk about some more substantial pieces that I've been working on over the last couple of years. And I have to give a little bit of a warning because these pictures have some overt political content, and it's not really my purpose to talk about that content today. However, I have to refer to it a little bit to get at what I'm trying to do artistically with them. And whether you agree or disagree with my politics, I hope you can put that aside for a few minutes and instead concentrate on the artistic tools that I'm trying to talk about, and of which these, as it turns out, are my best example. So I kind of have to use these examples for this talk. And think about whether these artistic, there might be some tools here that might be useful for yourself in whatever art that you're doing. So this is a piece, and these next three pieces are about the destruction of Gaza over the last couple of years. And so this piece is called Oshkosh Has the Right to Defend Itself. And Oshkosh is a city about 20 miles from where I live, and it's where I work actually too. And it's the site, it's the home of a defense contractor, Oshkosh Defense, which makes heavy military trucks. And this is a 3-color new resinotype print. So this is one thing you can do with this is you can do 3 layers, like is sometimes done with, say, gum bichromate, and build up a color picture with 3 layers of, in this case, cyan, magenta, and yellow, the primary 3-color printing, subtractive printing colors. And it's done by literally taking a color picture, digitally separating into 3 black and white images, one each for the primary printing pigments, and then making 3 prints on top of each other, each time dusting it with a different colored pigment. And so that's what I did on this part here, which is a screen grab stolen from Google Earth of the grounds of some of the grounds of Oshkosh Defense with these military trucks all lined up and ready to be sold. But as I did each layer, I put a photogram object on it, and these are, they're called cake babies. You can actually, in some traditions, they're baked inside of a wedding cake, and whoever gets that piece of cake with the plastic little baby in it is going to have a baby next. And you can buy a bag of cake babies, and I have many, many boxes of objects that I collect that are suitable, that might be useful for photograms. So as I did each exposure, I had my digital transparency under glass ready to print, but then I arranged these little cake babies on top of the glass to do the exposure. And then for the next color, I moved them a little bit and did it again. And you see they synthesize wherever the yellow and cyan overlap, you get green, where the red and the yellow overlap, you get red, and where the magenta and cyan overlap, you get blue, and where they all 3 overlap, you get black, etc. And I did that because I thought it just made sense to do that, because I was doing 3-color printing and it made sense to do this. But that later took on a bigger meaning that I didn't even realize at the time. If you look on my website, I talk about that. I'm not really going to go into it here. So that's one example. This is actually part of a triptych. And I'm not going to show you the one on the right side, but the one on the center is this. And that other one was 13 by 9 inch. This is 8 by 10 inch. And this is a direct print from film negative that I shot in my 8 by 10 large format Deerdorf camera. And there's an arm, and it's raised, and it's a left arm, and it's kind of dividing a dark and light. And there's a reason for that I won't really get into. I'm not really going to talk about the content of this picture very much. Again, you can look on my website and I talk about it. But some aspects of it. So first off, you see there's lots of scratching on here. This all comes in the process of wiping the pigment. If there are hard particles, it can scratch, and it gives this particular finish, which in this case I like. There's also some other details that appeared in this as part that aren't actually in the negative. This stuff here. And I don't really have time to go into why that happened, but I actually like it, so I left it. But what's really different about this picture is very much about self-reflection. It's about looking at myself in the mirror and not necessarily being completely okay with what I see. And that's very literal in this because it's actually printed on a mirror. So the black here is because it's a mirror, and if you illuminate a mirror from the side with a spotlight, the light misses you and looks black. Wherever the pigment is, it scatters light towards you and looks light. So it makes a negative image, like printing white pigment on black. And in this case, the pigment is not even any kind of ordinary white pigment. It's actually dust, and it's house dust from my workspace. And we don't live in an arid climate here. And so other than some pollen in the spring, house dust is coming from inside, not from outside. And it's mostly microscopic flakes of skin, shed skin. So this picture is mostly made out of myself or former versions of myself, my outermost layer, my skin, making little microscopic flakes that are scattering light in different directions and making the picture. This was literally, I exposed it and I went around and collected the dust with a brush from level surfaces in my workspace, which I guess that's an excuse for not keeping it very clean. This is another one I did that's a little more complicated and demonstrates how, because of this is lens, it's not a work on paper, it's for hard, flat, stiff surfaces. It lends itself to things that are a little more sculptural. And this is part of a diptych. And it's, again, a three-layer color pictures. The images were pulled from press photos and then arranged and made this digital layout and made the digital pictures. This is referring to two events last August where two hospitals were bombed in Gaza and in each case killed several journalists. It's called the Canon of Hussam al-Masri, which is him. I think he was a stringer for Reuters. And it's called that because the pretext for bombing that hospital was that there was supposedly a Hamas camera on the roof, but it turned out it was just his ordinary Canon DSLR on an ordinary tripod. And so I again have this, the subtitle of this is Self-Portrait with Martyrs, and it's riffing off of the Artemisia Gentileschi picture, Self-Portrait as a Martyr, where she has a palm frond coming out of her breast, which is a kind of Christian iconography for martyrdom. So I'm kind of playing on those, and I printed on the back of this lens as a sort of the lens is looking at me, and that's the self-portrait. And I intentionally made it dark and a negative, and because I guess I was feeling negative and dark. The feathers are a fourth layer made with Conte ochre, red ochre, which I already knew did not make a very good continuous tone image. So I hadn't really been using it for prints, but it makes a great silhouette. And then also the earthiness of it. And also you see a kind of solarized look. And that's a consequence of, I don't really think I have time to get into it, but some of the quirkiness of doing three-color printing with dry powdered pigments, because of their opacity, you can intentionally or not get this kind of effect. Okay, I have just another minute here. So finally, this piece is called Geography of the Genocide for Francesca Albanese. And this is all stolen from Google Earth. This is a map. This is where I live right here. This is Lake Winnebago in northeast Wisconsin in the Fox River Valley. This is Gaza. and the Mediterranean coast, and I made them both at exactly the same scale and put them on top of each other. And then I have connections between the two and a key going around the edge with distances in this sort of imaginary world where you can't ignore what's happening thousands of miles away. And the cake babies have returned, and their colors are a key to which thread. And they're making connections between places that have been in the news over the last few years in Gaza and in Israel, and then places nearby where I live that have some documented economic complicity with mostly businesses that have some economic complicity with what's been happening. And then the distance that they would be on this imaginary. So right up here, one of them is, and the threads are connected with needles that I've drilled directly into the picture. And so like here, my home to Rafa is 31 miles on this imaginary map. And the physicality of this process really lends itself to combining it with sculptural elements that you really couldn't, probably wouldn't really work out with the work on paper that much. And so I think that's my half hour. And you can see more details on this process. And those pictures in particular is a big long essay about them on my website there. And again, DM me if you want me to give you a download link for the chapter that tells how to do this.
Thank you so much, John. Amazing presentation, amazing images. I think we can go with the questions that our audience has done just fast. If you can just answer, just not to go to the end and then come back because it will be longer. Calliope is asking what are the approximate exposure times or at least ranges on basis of your images?
So it varies a lot depending on the background. They're shorter on a black background than on a white background, and what resin you're using, what kind of pigment you're using, a lot of things. But very rarely do I have an exposure longer than 10 minutes. And sometimes as low as a minute and a half. This picture here that was done in sunlight, this little test, this was a minute and a half out in sunlight. So very short.
Okay, that's good. Jenny's asking how archival is the acrylic polymer resin? How archival is?
Well, that's a good question. It's basically once it's been cured, it's basically acrylic plastic. One concern about it is it will, with a lot of exposure to more UV, that it might yellow. That's mitigated by the fact that it's very, very thin. Whether it lasts, delaminates and peels off or lasts 100 years or whatever, I really have no idea. And this is a new process and nobody's actually tested that. And so I certainly, mine from several years ago look just like when I made them, but that's just several years.
Sure, because you have 3-4 years, you have them and
Right.
they're still
And
working.
of course, the pigments are depending on whatever pigments you choose.
Sure. Ralph is asking if you have tried to do a transfer from laser jet inkjet print to wet, partially cured resin.
Like doing a direct transfer of the print onto the resin. No, I haven't tried that. I don't really see I think that would be problematic because the inkjet print would just, I think, the plastic of the print would stick to it, I think. So I use it as a dusting on process, and I think it would be doing some kind of a more wet transfer, I think would be an issue. I think you'd end up with a sticky mess.
Okay, you already know the result. Maybe you can try it or everyone can try it, but yes, if you think it's going to be a mess, probably it's going to be it. Okay, good. Any last minute question for John? If not, we can just keep it and ask him. Someone is asking, where can we buy resin?
So I just get them. I mean, on Amazon, you can find many brands. Now, the brand I've been using might not be available anymore. It's kind of a moving target with these. And in fact, there are many that look like different brands, but if you sample them, you see they're really the same company. And so, but on Amazon, if you just search for UV curing resin or UV photopolymer resin, you'll find many. I'm actually applying for a grant now to do a major systematic study of different resins and pigments, and getting step wedge images as a sort of a database from to work with. The particular one I've been using that I still have plenty of and has worked great. It's called Kio DIY. So QIAO DIY.
I think you can put the link when Lynn start talking. You can just put the link, and people can have it
Yeah.
from there. That will be nice. Okay, but that means that the biggest part of the resins work. I mean, we can just find any UV resin, and it might work.
And they'll probably work, but some will work. They'll give different contrast ranges, and some will work better than others.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, John. If there are more questions, we will be back, or if we have time, we will be back in the end with questions for everyone. Lynn, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes, let me just share my screen here. Perfect.
We can see it perfectly fine.
Awesome. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lynn Bierbaum. I'm a sculptural experimental photographer is kind of the term I've coined myself and all the weird experimental work that I've been doing. And for this webinar, I'm predominantly going to be talking about my newest body of work that I created at the start of last year entitled Echoes. And this was a solo exhibition that was held in Minneapolis, Minnesota at FOSI, the Minnesota Center for Glass Arts, which is my current and most active glass studio that I work at and make most of my work out of as well. I'm going to talk a little bit, I think, about the conceptual ideas that really derived both the photographs and the photographic work, and then a little bit into more like the technical end of how I actually print these images onto either my blown or fused glass. There we go. So I like to think that my passion for photographic processes really began with the fascination of light as a creative tool, thinking about how painters use paintbrushes and paint, and ceramicists use ceramic as their predominant material. For me, photography felt like light was really the predominant way that I was able to create my work. I was fascinated with photograms when I first kind of began, and I loved the translucency of the material of glass. And so trying to find ways to start to combine and create work that embodied translucency and materiality in order to create images that weren't necessarily meant to be seen in its like truest state, but using light to actually project and create images. So that was the largest kind of inspiration behind the technical aspect of creating echoes. I think that the etymology of photography, or to paint with light, continues to guide this practice into even my current work nowadays. Long before there were handheld devices and digital sensors, light was a tactile force capable of sculpting form and emotion. In the darkroom, I harnessed this phenomenon to create tonal prints or plates that carry the physicality of touch, like the fingerprints left behind by a ceramicist. And so for me, light is what gives my work visual weight. This is what the first or one of the photographs that kind of inspired this idea, driven by a fear of forgetting. a feeling that's intimately tied to photography's rise as an archival tool throughout the 1800s. My desire to document rose from a need to preserve memories, especially familial and vernacular objects, in a hopes to find solitude in the chaotic world that surrounds us. And for me, I found going and taking these photographs, I would go up, I'm from Minnesota, Minneapolis area, and so I would go either to northern Minnesota, up into Wisconsin, where John is from, and even all the way up into Michigan to try to find that sense of solitude and understand why it was important to enjoy being alone as well as being around others as well in kind of this busy environment within the city. I was shooting predominantly digital as it was just much easier than carrying around a big 4x5 or 8x10 camera to make my wet plate prints. And so I would photograph using a Fuji GFX 50, and I was able to then have all these digital files and be able to manipulate them using Photoshop and digital technologies to get the exact tonal range that I wanted to achieve for this kind of ethereal or more soft feeling within my darkroom print. So I'm combining both digital as well as analog and alternative means to create this photographic series. This print here was actually made as a silver gelatin print. And then once I had made the silver gelatin print, I toned it in a sepia toner to get that kind of nice, rich, almost chocolatey brown tones to the print itself. For me, experiencing my grandfather going through dementia affected me emotionally, not only as a person, but also as a maker. And as his condition worsened, what he feared most was being alone with his unknowing thoughts. His fear kind of evolved into my fascination with the quiet, calm moments that punctuate our chaotic world. So after I finished graduate school in about 2023, I moved back to Minnesota, where my family all resides. And we ended up moving my two grandparents up into a memory care facility about 10 minutes away from my family's home. And so going through both taking care of him and understanding kind of this, how dementia not only affects his memory, but his personality, and this kind of environment that felt so foreign, even though it was with people that were so familiar. And so I took these kind of thoughts and these lingering uncomfortable feelings that I had with me when I went out to photograph. And where I've always felt the most calm was in nature. And so I took my camera out into nature to find these moments of kind of solitude and these moments where I found this connection between either the natural world and the kind of created world that us as humans make. And so that's where a lot of the kind of imagery started to be inspired from. Because for me, this series became my way of searching for these moments of impermanence as a way to greater understand the idea that all of our memories fade over time. And so I was both photographing interior spaces, exterior spaces, and finding that kind of connection between them. Once I had kind of built up this body of photographic work, I always knew it would become sculptures. Being both a glass blower as well as a photographer, I wanted to find a way to start to connect these into more of that ethereal and impermanent nature through the tool of light. So this is kind of where the process of making my photographic prints started to come about. As I mentioned, shooting mostly digital, I'm able to manipulate the images using Photoshop and alter the densities to create either digital positives or digital negatives, dependent on whatever background glass I was working with. So if I was using a darker colored glass, such as like an amber or a black glass, I would use a digital positive so that the natural wet plate collodion chemistry would have that rich, almost creamy opalescent tone on the surface of the glass. And if I wanted something that was more translucent, using clear or very light colored glass, such as white or opal, I could end up using a digital negative to then print a wet plate negative and almost playing with the process to create a positive. So always kind of thinking throughout the process of what is the final outcome and what steps or what kind of tools or processes do I need to add in order to create that work. So here are actually two of my digital positives that were then printed onto fused glass panels, and one of which you can see the wet plate piece after it had just been completed. And on the left-hand side of that plate is all covered in electrical tape. That way I don't have to clean up near as much of the leftover varnish and chemistry off of the areas that I want to remain just pure glass. And then the image remains on the other side of the glass surface where the image will stay. And this is kind of how those two pieces ended up in their final form. And so once they were completed in the darkroom by doing the entire wet plate collodion process, coating it onto the surface of the glass using collodion, I actually pour my silver nitrate right onto the surface rather than using a dip tank. That way I'm able to use any form or size and scale that I want to be able to make these pieces. And just pouring the chemistry on, I get these natural chemistry marks or these spots throughout the process that I really enjoy. I know they're not technically the most perfect collodion prints out there, but that's okay. I think that the beauty of the process is the chemical nature and some of those hazy marks that can be achieved. As I've kind of worked within the process, I start to realize why they are being created or what part of the process makes the various chemical markings, such as little what look almost like bubbles, is from lack of sensitization of the silver nitrate or it not being on the surface of the collodion for long enough. And so you get those beautiful markings that can only be created throughout this unique print. So as I mentioned, I'm also a glass blower. So most of my work, once I have the photographic series in mind of what I want to create, I then have to create the vessels in which they go onto. And that always begins in the hot shop. As I mentioned, I work at FOSI, the Minnesota Center for Glass Arts, and that's where I currently make most of my work out of. But this is actually a photograph of myself and one of my main glass assistants and good friends, Mackenzie Serwa, making some rondelles that were a part of my MFA All Memories Fade series. And so these vessels end up being created while they're over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, over 1,200 degrees Celsius. And I'm able to manipulate and warp this malleable material until I have the form that I'm looking to print on. Generally, I work in flat forms. So this piece here is called a rondelle or a plate, or I will use cork paddles to be able to actually flatten the glass and be able to make it printable surfaces. So even though some of my objects might appear like they're three-dimensional and complete round, both sides are actually flattened. So it becomes no different than printing on a piece of sheet glass. And I'm able to continue to work with this wet plate collodion process on more custom-made objects and forms. So going into a couple blown pieces that were included in the Echoes series were these pieces here called Whispering Pines. As I was making these, it was around the time of the wildfires in LA, and I had the images already prepared and ready before the fires even began. And as I was printing them, I really started to view them in a very different light of kind of this impermanence and this loss of not only human property, but also the natural environment too, and the remembrance of what was lost and what will never be again, but the kind of anew that is built from that. And so these pieces were created with the original intent of it being around the idea of dementia and memories, but started to kind of transform as I was actually creating them. And these, the way that I create them is I start by adding the color in the center, filling it with clear, encasing it in another layer of clear, and adding that black, what we call a wrap, around the edges, and then flattening it all. So the larger piece on the left-hand side is about 10 inches in height, 12 inches in width, and only about an inch in its thickness. So even though it might appear like it's round in three-dimensionality, it really is almost like a flat form. And same with the piece on the right, just without that black wrap on the outside edge. So getting more into like the darkroom technical side of it, again, I predominantly work in wet plate collodion as my main passion in the darkroom. And so using those digital positives, I'm able to start by wrapping the entire form in that electrical tape and using an X-Acto knife to cut out where I want the image to be on the surface. Again, helping with more cleaning up at the end, making my life a little easier, working smarter, not harder. And I'm able to then just lay that digital positive in contact with the emulsion. One thing that I've noticed is when I use digital positives, I avoid putting the inked surface against the collodion like you would normally do when doing contact prints for other alternative processes, because I like the slight haze that's created from the separation, but it's also because that ink will actually react with silver nitrate and it ends up creating more kind of bubbling and tones. And I wanted the print to be as clean or as clear as I could possibly make it. So having the transparent side of the positive laid in contact with the chemistry helps to prevent too many of those chemical markings and hazing when I had such a high detail image. And here is the actual final piece that was created from that digital positive. And the amber color on the inside has that slight translucency. So when there's light projecting behind, it plays with the duality of positive and negative that I think is fascinating about the wet plate process and ambrotypes in general. Next is more what are kind of the biggest undertaking in wet plate that I've ever done. I had no idea how I was going to feasibly achieve this. I bought some flat, large pieces of just like window glass and talked with a friend of mine who was an amazing fusing glass artist. And I said I wanted to warp them and bend them and make them seem not just like flat wall shelves, but something that had a bit more depth to them and could play and warp with the light as well as the images. So these pieces here are actually 32 inches long, which is over 2 feet in length. And some of the photographs are also almost 1.5 feet in its scale. So it was a matter of how do I make a print this big with larger trays, and do I have enough silver to do this as well? And so it was a big kind of undertaking to figure out the technical end of these as once I knew the images that were going on them. So here are actually the digital negatives that were made, because when I was making these, I was actually printing them as glass negatives. So starting with a negative, printing it as a negative, I ended up with a positive. And so these were starting out just as what I wanted the chemistry to create the shadows rather than the highlights. And here are them kind of in process, and you can see just how large the actual piece is within the processing tank itself. Where I didn't want the chemistry to overlap on the other part of the glass, I used my handy dandy electrical tape. And I also had a student assistant come in and help me. And so I almost acted like a director throughout this process. They held the glass plates with their hands underneath so that there wasn't any fingerprints on the chemistry. And I poured the chemistry over the surface and directed them to move them right side back or the left side forward. And that way we were almost able to work in tandem to move the chemistry across the surface. And that's how we also got all of those beautiful like chemical markings and bubblings from where the developer wasn't put on perfectly even, which on a plate that large is sometimes difficult, and being all these wonky shapes as well. And so when I was making these, I started by making one print, would let it completely dry, and then I would expose the other print. And the hardest part of printing two separate photographs on one object is that it ends up almost you can't get chemistry on the print that you just made. So it took a lot of practice of just making sure that I wasn't blending them too much. And I'll go through these a little bit quicker as I know we're running lower on time. So these are some bell jars that were also included in the series, and were also a part of my MFA All Memories Fade collection as well. And I would create the glass bell jars in the hot shop just hollow, and I would fill them with a silk photograph that was printed with just inkjet printer onto that silk material, and kind of frayed the edges and filled it with UV reactive resin, and cured it so that it would cure almost too quickly, and it would pop and crack and create bubbles almost like ice inside of the object because of how dense the resin was inside of these forms. And it created these forever almost ice-like objects where the photographs were floating within. And there were 24 of the bell jars within this series, representing the 24 years of separation between the first time I had been to our family farm, and then it was sold when I was 2 years old, and then going back to it 24 years later and realizing how different the family farm actually was from what I had remembered, or this kind of memory of the farm that I had created in my mind over the 24 years. So each piece, as it gets larger, the distortions get greater, showing how our memories naturally warp and fade throughout our lives and throughout time. And last are a couple lasergrams, which I actually learned this process at Experimental Photo Festival back in 2022 from Ghoul, who is an amazing artist. And I found that this connection of light as a tool, again, connected with the work and warping memories through light. And so I created first the image on the right-hand side as a silver gelatin print, and then printed it as a calotype to create the beautiful, rich kind of brown tones from the process. And so these were kind of the final pieces that connected all of my concepts and ideas through material and translucency and fragility in those objects. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lynn. It was an amazing presentation. I mean, we love to see these kind of projects that are also 3 dimensions. We're always asking our students also to think outside of the wall. That is one of the problems that we have always with photography, that is a 2D thing, and we don't know a lot how to do it, and our students are always asking us how to do things differently, and we really love your work on the way that you can mix all these different materials. And I'm always putting your example and others, because you know from glass blowing first. I mean, you have 2 techniques, you know, that you can mix. How was, just to know a little bit historically, and people can make questions if they want, how was your relationship with both arts and crafts? I mean, you started with one and then went to the other, or how it was the way? This is what we are always inviting our students in Agora to learn from other things outside of photography. How was your history about that?
Yeah, so I first learned glass blowing in undergraduate. There was a glass blowing major there. And so I took a class thinking, hey, when else am I ever going to get to try it? And I found a love for process, just like the love for process in the darkroom that I had built over the last few years. So I had already been working in darkroom photography, predominantly in film and silver gelatin. But when I worked with it, I was like, well, I've heard of processes that you can work on sheet glass, so why couldn't I print on something that's blown or three-dimensional? And from there, it was just a matter of continuing to experiment and kind of figure out through a lot of failures of what worked and what didn't. And anyone who's interested in trying to learn a sculptural medium, I say just go for it. Like either if, I mean, a hot shop is not always the most accessible place to find to make work in glass, but there's always more home friendly, such as fusing glass, casted glass, things where you don't have to necessarily have as much equipment, or even ceramic work. Because when you think about a glazed surface on ceramic, you're working on glass. And so there's a lot of different materials that you can begin to print on the three-dimensional way. It's just a matter of continuing doing lots of tests and enjoying the process of experimenting with combining kind of the 2 and 3D worlds. And that's where I kind of found my home within alternative photography and within glass blowing is combining these two passions by just a lot of experimenting and a lot of tests and a lot of failure.
Great. Yes, Miss Aline asking. Martin says process is always the best part of art. And
Exactly, I agree.
I like your idea that the processes are not so different, there are many dark rooms. Each art has its own dark room and craft, and it's really good if you can mix them. I mean, this is also an invitation for all the participants to do your kind of things, because sometimes photography is too close to photography, we just see photography and we do photography and we get inspired with photography. And we always remember your case, for example, or the case of Felicita Russo, that was more or less at the time of when you were at the festival, that she was working for the NASA as a scientist. She was working on the lenses of the NASA microscope, telescopes.
Yeah.
That was great. I said, why a scientist is doing this? This kind of science or other approaches can really give us this new point of view that photography is needing, because in the end, I think what all the people in our community, Agora, Experimental, they are looking for new things, as in your case. I don't know if you have seen over the last year that there are more and more and more interest on this kind of work, how you are living this situation.
Yeah, I think sculptural photography has really grown throughout even the last like 6 to 8 years when I started to get in it and started to kind of project my voice as a sculptural photographer. And it's so fascinating to see both students wanting to explore combining more mediums, because I know even 10 years ago, it was like, I'm a photographer, I'm a glass blower, I'm a ceramicist, but it's like, you don't have to be one. You can be an artist who works in multiple different media types and be able to combine those passions. By doing so, you're only going to create more unique and more truthful work to yourself by not limiting yourself to just one style or one process. And understanding, as I mentioned, processes continuous between fields and between media types. And so if you find that process is what you enjoy, experiment and explore and find what makes it unique to you.
Okay, I love these amazing words. We have 160 people here. I think this is a great way of finishing your presentation. It's a great invitation for everyone to take the risk and also the happiness of looking for other ways of creating photography. Thank you so much, Lynn. We are going to go with Paweł, and then if there are more questions, we're just going to have a couple of minutes in the end to come back. I'm really happy of this webinar. I have to say it again. I'm really happy of what we are seeing. Many different things, but really good ones. And I think we are ready to see what Paweł has prepared today. You never know. With Paweł, you never know, which is a subject, what he's going to teach us. but we are always happy listening to you. Welcome, Paweł Kula from Poland.
Hi, my name is Paweł. I come from Poland, from Szczecin. We never know. And at the beginning, I want to say that my English is not the best. Yeah, it's the sometimes I will read from the paper, and my voice turn into the robot's voice. But at the beginning, let's start from the presentation. Moment. Oh my God. Moment. Okay, yeah. Here. Yeah, you see the presentation?
Yes,
Yes.
perfectly fine.
Okay.
Amazing portrait.
Yeah, it's a very old portrait, but it's very important for me. Very old. It's maybe from 90s, end of 90s. But I want to start from this picture because it's my first. It was the first moment when I started to think about the sun as a source of my project. My mind and very basic inspiration in something I call natural photosensitivity. Matter reacts to light all the time in plants, in minerals, in our bodies. What we usually call photography is just one small human-made fragment of this much bigger phenomenon. Yeah, from this time comes this kind of experiment when I try to record the traces of the sun on my skin. And I started to record or observe some natural situation in the nature when I observe the plant and I find the unintentional natural photography. Yeah, it's a kind of a joke, but it's the work from my allotment. But I find this picture under the soil. I look at fruits on street. I lift stones. I look under old wooden boards. I search for traces of how light has already acted on matter. In these moments, I like to think that photography, as we know it, doesn't really exist. There are only reactions, processes, transformations, and we are just observers. Here, for example, here is a very interesting moment when the picture appears on the ice. Yeah, and some strange documentation. Yeah, another kind of photography. For the last few years, I've been making drawings of after images created inside my own eyes by sunlight. I look at the sun for a very short moment. Sometimes I move my head slightly, like I'm drawing with my eyes, and then I close them or look into the darkness. And you know this phenomenon, but in this experiment, I want to experience the picture which can be recorded. For me, it contains many interesting ideas about photography. It's the phase of after images, which I saw in my inside my eye, but it's connected with photography. The camera is actually my own eye. The image is temporary, not permanent. It appears at a negative and then as a positive. When you open the eye, the image is negative. If you close the eyes, the image is negative. The picture is very intense, but it disappears, and it's completely private. It's very interesting moment when you can see the photography, but you are only one observer. Yeah, it's my old experiment with the phosphorescent pigment. Is the camera for disappearing images. It's a very simple camera with a bright lens and a special plate covered with the phosphorescent pigment. The image can be taken only in strong light, and the photograph is visible only in the darkness. It glows in green for a few minutes and then it disappears. That's why I call it a camera for disappearing images. Traditional photography was invented to produce stable, permanent picture, but this camera does the opposite. It creates images that cannot last. They fade just like memories. Yeah, it's another experiment with the very primitive camera. I've always wanted to simplify photography as much as possible, to free it from the obligation of representing something specific. This camera is pointed directly at the sun, and this video is maybe a little too long, but show very basic process. It's about sunlight projection and the mystery of photography itself. It's also a story about images that never really appear as photographs, but instead show themselves as a plant color, fire, reflection, and shadows under a tree. Yeah, of course, this camera was destroyed during whole process. Yeah, okay. Let's jump to the next. Okay, this is the work which was made with the antotype method. You know, antotype, it's the maybe more ancient experimental photography method from 19th century. But I use the sign of the sun, this dot surrounded by a cycle. It's a sign that appears in many cultures all over the world. Sometimes can mean consciousness, the birth of life, the beginning of a new universe. For me, it was important that is the astronomical sign of symbol of the sun. I use the plant pigment in many colors: green, yellow, violet, and pink, red, and I expose many days, and this sign symbol start to appear. Okay, the second part of my experimental activity in photography is the building very simple and primitive cameras. What I'm looking for here is a different way of seeing. Yeah, it's very strange that sometimes you can see that on every picture appear only my face or my body, but I work alone, and for me it's the best solution to to test my cameras with myself, I often work with the multi-lens cameras. When I use the multi-lens cameras, I can mix the picture and create a short animation. But at the beginning, I want to show a few construction. Sometimes I use the black and white paper, sometimes I use the color paper, negative, positive, solography methods. But it's not important what is on the picture, but how it appears inside the camera. Sometimes I use the slit scan photography to test some lenses. Sometimes I create very big camera only to check how it appears inside. Or camera for panorama photography. Sometimes I make only one photograph with a given camera. Some cameras are made for a single use, and others stay with me for years. It's the camera which was dedicated for the reversal process. It was exposed directly on the color paper and developed in the reversal process. And it was very interesting because if you know this method on this process, you know that the paper, the negative paper for RA4 process, when we develop into the positive, the picture is deep blue. And if you want to set the proper color, you have to use the filter inside the lens. And I find the lens with the filter inside, and started to create the picture with the normal color. That's a little complicated, but it's very funny because the picture appear without negative, like a Polaroid. Yeah, the face mixer, my favorite. Oh, I took only a few pictures. It's very difficult camera. But if the few person will stay before camera, the lenses divide and repeat the picture of the faces. It's very strange to predict and very difficult to predict where is the, for example, focus. Yeah, and the tablet and the projection in the vitamin D. Very small camera. Sometimes these cameras leave the studio and become part of action in public space. They start working with the people who didn't plan to be part of my artwork. Very often, a camera is built for a specific situation, event, or meeting. It's the first situation with this suitcase camera. I use it during a street action in my town. People pose for a portrait and talk with me for a moment. The negatives were made on paper and developed on the spot in the portable darkroom. You could see your portrait immediately. Yeah, the second camera was the pot. This camera was built for a social action in my city. during this action, groups of activists were cooking and serving free food outdoors. And my role was simple. I made portraits of the teams who were preparing the meals. But it was very important that my camera should be a little similar than the rest of the action. Yeah, the next action situation in my city, together with my student, we turned the window of an old closed photo studio into a giant camera. We used photographic paper. The image were developed immediately inside the camera. The paper was very big, 1 meter per 1 meter. And everybody who want to join could pose before the studio. We took the group portrait, develop inside and show outside and wash outside. Yeah, and this is the one example of the picture from this camera. Okay, the next experience with the camera. This situation was dedicated to the sun. I invited a group of friends for 1 day walk. We started at sunrise and finished at sunset. The rule was very simple. We always walked in the direction of the sun, ignoring roads, paths, and obstacles. And we had the camera, big camera. Yeah, it's the picture from our camera and our psych road on the map, and the short documentation. Maybe without sound. Yeah, we tried to change the situation with photography into the experience of our bodies, and this trip was very exhausted. It was May. The day lasted 16 hours, and our trip lasted the same time. Yeah, maybe it's not interesting. Next. Yeah, Berliner Zimmer, it's the camera from my walk through Berlin. During this walk, I collected pieces of wood and abandoned furniture from the streets. Later, I used them to build a special object. This object is a 3-dimensional map of the road I walked. At the same time, it is also a working photographic camera. Yeah, I can recognize the district of the Berlin. Yeah, here is the Kreuzberg. Here's the Friedrichshain, Moabit, and it was a map for me. Okay, and now I want to show you the part of my my work from the project PinAnima. PinAnima is a project based on the multi-lens cameras. It was inspired by the early experiments of Edward Maybridge and Etienne Marais. You know that this person experiment with the multi-lens cameras and the multi-exposure on the one picture. For me, it was the inspiration to create the multi-lenses cameras and use these pictures to create the animation. And every camera is connected with the short film. Yeah, it's the 48 lens cameras. Of course, it's the most primitive camera. It's the camera obscura. Here we have a projection of from one lens and the animation from this camera. Yeah, and another primitive example is, if I remember, it was 18 cans. Okay, and the first attempt to slice effect or bullet effect or matrix effect, when you can expose when you expose the whole strip of the paper in the same time. And the picture is the animation, but it was exposed in the one single moment in time. Yeah, and here is very interesting example because it's not the one camera, but many cameras, 25, sometimes more. And here, the picture appear with the whole mistakes and the flying frames. It's very interesting also because you can see that the body or the face is translucent because it was exposed many times. Here is only one exposure. Here is the 10, maybe 8 exposures with the strong flashlight. And if you know the experiment Tim Macmillan from 80s, it's the little similar, but Tim Macmillan did it with the best, with the better quality. There's another experiment from these cameras. I really like this kind of imperfection of the image. Yeah, here is the camera for 3D pictures, but of course you can create short animation also. And 5 lenses camera It's only for fun, but it works. And the more complicated construction. Yeah, it's the process. Paper negative, positive version. Yeah, it's the same. And short animation. And now is the time when I try to increase the time of this animation. It's my last work, last experiment with this kind of camera. Yeah, it's the matrix effect with the milk and with the light. Yeah, at the end, I want to show some animation from the Solaris project. Maybe it's not from Solaris project, but it's from the time when I started with solarography. It's my oldest animation. In this animation, I used the solarography method, and I want to show. Okay, and the one picture from this animation is the 1 day of exposure. I created 370 frames from solstice to solstice. Yeah, and this whole animation show in motion what solarography usually shows in a single image. It's a very simple. It was very primitive camera with the CAN camera. 2 years later, I created better quality animation. Moment, because it was the lens camera, but the rules was the same, the 1 day exposure. And the last animation is my fresh experiment, where the one single frame is the 6 month of exposure solarography. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paweł. Really amazing. People has been putting many amazing comments about your work. We really love it. This last one, you said there were how many cameras? 6 months?
The last animation with the
Yes.
6 months of exposure, it was 30 cameras.
6 months, 30 cameras, and then you did the animation.
Yeah.
Okay, my first question is, I have been listening to you different times, but this time I saw you more focused on the creation of cameras. Where do you have all these cameras? Because we have a couple of them in the archive of Experimental Photo Festival, but where are the rest of them? I mean, you have been building cameras over the last 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Where are they?
Where are my cameras?
Yes.
So, sometimes is in the rubbish bin. For example, I create the camera only to check one projection, one effect, and that's why I created camera with the not from the wood but from the carton, for example, from the paper. I check the effect, and sometimes it's enough for me. Yeah, when when I take a first picture and I understand how it works, I lost this camera. Yeah.
You don't have a big
No,
archive
no,
of your
no.
cameras, no.
No, only the picture. But I have many cameras, but not here. I have many cameras in my studio or
I mean,
in
but you are
many
not obsessed
places.
with the cameras. You are
No,
obsessed on
no.
understanding how camera generates
Yeah,
images.
it's very important for me to understand how it works. Sometimes when I imagine the effect in my camera, it's enough for me to create the model, check or see the results, and that's all for me. That's why my body or my face appear on many pictures from this camera, because I am a model for myself. I work alone, and yeah, that's the reason. I'm not the narcissist.
Okay, good. Someone was asking about these multiple exposures. If you use the same paper, I can see that some of them you use the same paper and some of them you use different pinholes, but using the same paper.
Okay, yeah, I use the same paper, but sometimes I use the pinhole camera. And when I use the pinhole camera, you know that we need more light. And when I use the okay, I don't need a shutter, and I release every shutter or I release the every cameras in the same time with the flashlight in the dark in the darkness in the studio. But sometimes the camera obscura it's too dark for this kind of experiment. That's why I started to create the camera with the lenses. And with the lenses, I have many. I have a time and I have more light, and I use the normal flashlight. My cameras with the lenses has an aperture circa 8-11, and of course the camera obscura has an aperture circa 100. It creates the difference.
Great. Yes, it's good to know because someone was also asking for exposure times. I also have a question about the negatives that you are using. I mean, you are using direct paper. You show some project with anthotypes at the beginning, but you're also using film. I mean, normal 35 mils or not, or you are creating or using other kind of negatives for your work?
I used many material, light sensitive materials. Very bizarre is the phosphorescent pigment. It needs the strong light and very bright lenses. But when I use the normal film, I develop in this film in the normal way. But when I use the color, the paper for color photography or color print is the normal color paper for the RA4 process. Sometimes I develop it in reversal process, but it's not professional process because I add to the RA4 process only the first developer, black and white developer. It's a normal positive process. Maybe it's not the time to explain how it process works, but it's a normal structure of the reversal process. Yeah, when where we should develop the negative mask, exposure the picture, and develop the rest of the picture on the paper. And I experimented with this method. I started this experiment many years ago, and sometimes I create the cameras only for this kind of picture. But this camera need the filter inside or before the lens, because you have to change this blue color to the normal color. For example, you have to use the yellow and pink filter.
But what is the idea of doing the reversal process? I mean, what do you win, or what you are looking when you use that process?
for me, it's okay. Sometimes I looking the very long exposure, but solar graph is the the longest process, and it's enough for me. But before before time of solar graph, it was before 2000. I looked for the situation when I can decrease the speed of material. In this time, I didn't use an antotype, for example. I didn't use the lumen print. And when you start develop, when you start the cross material and develop in the different process, sometimes the speed of material decrease. And it was my first inspiration when I started to use the reversal process. And the second is that the picture appear without negative, and it's the original version. Without you can't repeat this kind of picture. Yeah.
I mean, you can do a direct, so to say, kind of a direct positive, and you don't have to do all the process of developing the negative and then print, make a copy. Okay.
Yeah, of course, I digitalize this picture and I can repeat the digital version, but yeah, the original is only one.
Sure. John, are you there? I hope so, because you were also working with different projects and debates. I remember when we were talking with Annette, and you were talking with Annette also about this direct positive and also all these modifications of the process, also for reducing the exposure times, for having direct positives. Do you have any comment or any idea or any experience that you want to tell also about this? We have 2 more minutes.
I'm not sure. I mean, I've used my resinotype thing in a camera, but it takes like an all day long exposure, and I've gotten some direct positives with that. And I don't know, maybe we're talking about Annette and I worked out how to effectively make a cyanotype positive directly from a cyanotype negative. We're talking about that. And so I had done the things of making cyanotype negatives in camera, but then I had digitally scanned them to make a positive. And Annette was in my workshop for that, and she really wanted to do negatives from negatives to make a positive, all cyanotype. And that had been tried since John Herschel, and it doesn't work very well because the paper blocks UV and the cyanotype doesn't absorb it. And you could do the cyanotype on glass or a thin paper, but the cyanotype still doesn't block much UV. And when I described this to Annette in a second, she said, well, why not tone the cyanotype so it blocks UV? And because of course that's her thing. And then both of us played with it over the next year, and she succeeded pretty well. And there's an example in my book of doing a cyanotype negative in a homemade camera like I had in my workshop, and then her direct cyanotype print from that cyanotype negative.
Lynn, how's your experience with positives, negatives? Because wet plate collodions are positives, and then with exposure times, because I can imagine it can change also the exposure times depending on the materials that you are using.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the process. I always start with just testing and figuring out whatever alternative process I'm working in, whether I want it to be a positive or a negative. Because sometimes I even like the kind of ghostly feel that comes from printing a negative purposefully, similar to John Beaver's work as well, and the self-portrait he had on the lens, and being able to kind of play with that process. So it kind of just depends. I'm more so just doing tests, but it really also dictates if I'm doing an ambrotype, what type of glass I'm working on. So if I'm working on a lighter colored glass versus a darker colored glass, that also kind of depends whether I need it to be a positive or a negative. And I'm able to kind of, sometimes if I don't know, I print both and do a check, and if I don't like it in one way, all right, wipe the plate. That's a nice thing about glass and collodion is you can always wipe off that chemistry before you varnish it and print on it again. So I could keep kind of trying things out if I don't like how it turns out the original way.
That's great. Okay, guys, I want to say thanks to all of you, to the three presenters. It was such a pleasure to know more about what you are working now, because we are not updated from Experimental Photo Festival. This was an amazing update. I hope you can come back to Experimental to show what you are doing now, and we hope also all of the participants that were here or are here, 130 people, can also come to Experimental, because we have many amazing artists like this working with these amazing techniques. There are no limits for photography. Never listen to those who say that photography is limited. There are no limited. There are a lot of opportunities for experimentation. And that's what we do here in Barcelona. And if you can come also, you can join us online. As you can see, we have a lot of webinars every 2 months. We also have the diploma in experimental photography. We're teaching more than 60 techniques. None of these techniques are on the diploma because they are really hard to get for the classes, but we have many of others that you will love. Thank you so much for being here. It was such a great pleasure, and thank you so much. Have fun, and we hope you can start your week with this huge inspiration of the artist. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.